My name is Dee Dee Evans. I'm on staff at St. James Episcopal Church in Wichita, Kansas. And I'm here today because I've known Mike from college days when he lived with my son David and husband Dennis in Wichita. So he's my second son. Let us pray. O God of grace and glory, we remember before you this day our brother Mike. We thank you for giving him to us, his family and friends, to know and to love as a companion on our earthly pilgrimage. In your boundless compassion, console us who mourn. Give us grace to see in death the gate of eternal life, so that in quiet confidence we may continue our course on life, until by your call we are reunited with those who have gone before, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. And from the book of Ecclesiastes, for everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven. A time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to cast away, a time to rend and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace.
Let me start with a disclaimer. Mike knew me to be an emotional person. And when I cry, don't be sad for me. All I ask is for your patience, because that's how much I love Mike. And I will get through this. So here we go. On behalf of the entire Huitt family, I'd like to welcome you and thank you for being here today. Michael Craig Huitt, 56, died Saturday, August 12th, 2017 in Newark, New Jersey. He was born February 18th, 1961 to Ellis Webb and Betty Jean Patterson Huitt, Jr., and raised on a farm south of Cullison. Mike graduated from Skyline High School in 1979, where he was active on the yearbook committee, Stuco, band, photography, and student newspaper. He also worked for the Pratt Tribune as a photojournalist. Mike attended the University of Kansas to study journalism. After college, he went to work for Cake TV in Wichita as a photojournalist. After being at Cake several years, he worked in New York City for ABC News. Following that, Mike worked at PBS as an operations manager in Washington, D.C., and several international satellite companies in New York City, as well as being a fashion photographer. Michael was preceded in death by his mother, Betty Huitt, and grandparents, Clyde and Tora Patterson, and Ellis and Hallie Huitt, Sr. He is survived by his father, Ellis, and wife, Phyllis Huitt of Pratt, sisters Nancy Kingsley of Hutchinson and Linda Huitt of Longmont, Colorado, nephew Brad and his wife Rebecca Huitt of Bentonville, Arkansas, Uncle Kurt Huitt of Pratt, several cousins, and numerous friends and colleagues. I met Mike at KU in 1979, where we lived in the same dorm. At that time, I had no idea how much of an impact that meeting would have on my life. I just thought he was a good guy. We realized we had common interests, but more importantly, a common appreciation for sarcasm and dry humor. Plus, Mike knew Larry Hatterberg. We quickly became friends, and during that first Christmas break, Mike had an internship at Cake, and he needed someplace to stay. So he stayed with my family, and soon was considered part of the family. In fact, through the years, Mike and I lived together off and on several times. That's what friends do. Our third year of college, we moved into a house along with two other friends at 633 Main Street in Lawrence. To this day, memories of that house and events around it still made us smile. By that time, and thanks to Mike, I changed my major to journalism. One of my classes was photography. I made Mike the subject of a class assignment and photographed him working the sideline at a KU football game for Cake. That's what that's from. Just this past July, Mike texted me a picture from that assignment he had kept and said, "Life was much simpler back then, and there was always the house on Main Street." Mike was a loyal friend. There are so many stories, inside jokes, and memories that I could share of our adventures. And there are some that I cannot share. There was a time that Mike won the blue ribbon at the Cloud County Fair for photography, even though he didn't enter the competition. Him installing stereo speakers in my sister's car, us searching for the perfect fountain Dr. Pepper in Lawrence, shooting things with guns on his farm, including a certain German textbook, interviewing the rock band In Excess at the Cotillion Ballroom, both of us getting jobs at ABC News, the Scotchlist night at the South Street Seaport in New York City, ordering what we called the traditional Thanksgiving pizza when we had to both work on Thanksgiving, and the bizarre cattle crossing on the Kansas Turnpike. I will tell you one story, and Sharon, you will know your part when it comes. There was this time when Mike and I were both working at Cake, and Sharon had worked in Denver, who was working in Denver. And we decided to go on a road trip to see Sharon, but we weren't going to tell her. So we drove to Denver, walked into the lobby of the station, and told the receptionist we were there to surprise Sharon. Would she get her to come up? When Sharon walked into the lobby, she saw us and loudly said,
"You jerks, I can't believe you're here."
We had a great weekend, but eventually it was time for us to leave. Sharon's mom fried us chicken for the drive back, and Sharon gave us what was probably a 1 pound bag of peanut M&Ms. By the time we'd finished the chicken, we were in western Kansas. We decided to pull out the M&Ms. We noticed the bag had sucked in from the difference in the altitude. Being the intelligent guys that we were, we thought if we slowly opened up the bag, we could probably hear the air suck back into it. Mike was driving at that time, so we leaned our heads together as I slowly pulled on the bag. Suddenly the bag ripped open and the M&Ms exploded all over the car. There were still M&Ms in that car rattling around when I sold it later. This past New Year's, Mike and I made a resolution to go on another road trip. He texted, "You bring the BMW and I'll bring the M&Ms." When I visited Mike's grave, instead of laying flowers, I laid a bag of peanut M&Ms. Mike always remembered where he was from. I know firsthand. He was successful at ABC because of two things. The work ethic he learned growing up on a farm in Kansas, and his thirst for technology he learned growing up at Cake. Both served him well. Mike always remembered my birthday as best friends do, even though I often missed his. And he always reminded me that I was older than him. This year I did remember his birthday and pointed out to him he was getting closer to 60. And he quickly replied that I was still closer. You know, when you're 18 or 19, you don't realize when blessings walk through the door. It takes time to take for that perspective. Mike was a blessing to me. Earlier, I said that Mike had made a big impact in my life. I had no way of knowing at the time what a gift being a friend of Mike was going to be. The fact is, if I had never met Mike, I wouldn't have the life that I have now. I would never met any of you, except for you, Mom. Nor would I have my career, or met my lovely wife, Lori, or have two wonderful sons. A few months ago, in that same conversation about simpler times, I reminded Mike he had gotten me started in this industry, and I thanked him. As usual, he made a joke of it. That was Mike. But I told him it was true, and I told him how much I appreciated it. I am so glad that I had that opportunity to thank him. Mike was a best friend, a loyal friend, a family member, and a brother, and I miss him.
It's nice to see all of you here. I'm sure Michael is smiling. I remember him always smiling, seems like. My name is Gary Shapiro, and like a lot of people in this room, I worked with Mike at Cake TV. He and I met in 1978 in Rock, Kansas. Very first time I saw him. He was in high school. He was shadowing Larry that day. I'm sure Larry will talk more about that, but I was down covering the missile silo explosion in Rock, big national story, and I can't remember if it was that day or the second day or the third day. We were there quite a bit, but I went back to the live truck to feed something or to write something, and there was this guy in there, and he said, "Can I get you anything? Can I do anything for you?" And I said, "No, I think I'm okay." And "Who are you?" And he smiled, and that was the beginning of our friendship. Michael was a lot of things, if you knew him. He obviously was extremely talented. He ended up going to KU after high school, and then came to Cake, and I was lucky enough to work with him at Cake for a couple of years, and extremely talented guy, extremely fun guy. I moved on to Denver, and he stayed at Cake for a while after that. But I remember he was so much smarter than me when it came to anything technical in television, anything. But he was always very patient. He was always willing to help us techno-challenged reporters, and that's the way he was, and he was smiling. He was shy, but he was friendly. He was talented, but he was not cocky. He was quiet, but yet he was outspoken on a lot of things. After a few years after I left Wichita and went to work in Denver, Mike went to ABC, and I remember, we were ABC at the time, we were an affiliate in Denver at the time, and so I remember calling him a lot of times in New York and saying, you know, I just can't deal with the desk. Can you help me out with this? Can you get me some video, or can you find somebody to cover this for us? And even though it wasn't his job, he always did it, and I could kind of always hear him smiling on the other end of the line. So we did that for a few years, and I knew he was doing well, and I knew that he really loved what he was doing and the work that he was doing. I remember a few years ago, many years ago maybe, Katie and I were at a Rockies baseball game, and how random is that? I just looked over the section, and there was Sharon and Michael sitting there. And so we ended up going out after the game and catching up a little bit and having a few beers, and he smiled a lot that night. We told a lot of war stories that night. And when it was time to go home, for some reason, Katie and I had taken the bus to the baseball game and realized we didn't have our car with us, and Michael said, "I'll take you home, no problem." He was in town for a convention or something, and went and got his car out of the hotel and drove us up to where we live, 20, 25 minutes away in the middle of the night, and then went back downtown. But that's just the way he was. He was just a nice guy, always a nice guy. When social media came about and Facebook became a thing, it helped me and Michael connect again, because I hadn't seen him in a long time. I followed him. We chatted on Facebook quite a bit. I followed his photography. Just such an excellent photographer. And he took two pictures that stick out in my mind that I remember of the thousands of pictures that he's taken. But one was the Manhattan Henge, you know, the sun between the buildings a couple of times a year in New York City. He captured that so beautifully. And the other was a New York landscape too. It was Central Park, it was the lake, it was the buildings reflecting in the lake with the sun. Another iconic New York photograph, and I told him so on Facebook, and he appreciated that a lot. Like you, I was very shocked when Sharon told me what happened about Michael's health challenge, and like you, I wished I had reached out to him more, but the years got away from us, and we really didn't connect that much lately. But probably like you too, when I heard that Michael died, it forced me to look back on our friendship and what a truly wonderful person he was, and made me cherish all the times that we did have together, and made me realize how lucky that I was to get to know Mike. From a personal standpoint, I'd also like to mention that when I worked at Cake TV from 1978 to 1983, it was some of the best years of my personal and professional life. The people I worked with, many of them here today, the people I worked with were young, we were hungry, we were very talented, we were very passionate about what we did. We played hard, and we worked hard, and we told TV stories the right way. And that's why Michael fit in. And when he fit in, he was smiling.
Kind of. Don't tell anybody. It kind of fits. So the disclaimer that David had about crying, it goes for me too, so just stick with it, please. The 18th letter of the Hebrew alphabet is Chai, which is also Hebrew for the word life. So in Judaism, the number 18 is very lucky. My daughter was born on the 18th. My son graduates high school in 2018. Denver Broncos quarterback Peyton Manning wore the number 18. And Michael Craig Huitt was born on February 18th, 1961. Michael was the youngest of three, significantly younger than his lovely sisters, and the only boy. Many say he was the apple of his mother's eye. He was a talented photographer and a brilliant man. He fell into television, and as you've heard, the rest of the story is history. Let me make one thing clear. Everybody wants to know who I am. People have asked, whispered, and wondered for years. No, I am not a former girlfriend. Never, ever, ever. Michael and I were friends. We were besties, and never anything more. Boyfriends come and go. Best friends are lifelong friends. And such was the case for me and Michael. We met at Cake TV, the lovely place where we all came together, in 1983. I was fresh out of college and flew to Cake to interview for a photojournalism position. I shot a story, and while I was editing it, Larry Hatteberg walked into the editing room. He asked me, "What do you think?" I busted into tears. I said, I think if I were you, I would hire someone else. For reasons I never understood, he ignored my advice, which happened many times, and offered me the position. And little did I know, he was offering me Michael. He was always Michael to me, not in trouble, just always Michael. I never really remember meeting Michael, but he was my Radar O'Reilly. Always had my back and always worked one step ahead. Early into the job, I got called out one night to shoot aerials of a grain elevator fire. Clueless, I showed up in shorts, flip-flops, and a tank top. It's hot in Kansas. Michael greeted me at the station with, "You're wearing that to fly a fire?" I told him I wasn't sure what I was doing. He grabbed my camera, he switched this on, he turned that off, and said, "Stay in the chopper, point down, aim for the flames. Oh, and don't forget to record." Michael always took care of me. Working or not, he appeared when I needed him most. Cake had big suburban live trucks, and Jimmy will talk about the other suburban live truck story later, not now, okay? I could drive them okay, but I had to sit on a few tape boxes to see over the steering wheel. Parking in the tin shed at Cake TV was quite the chore. Michael always knew when I was out on a story, and as I came up the driveway, day or night, whether he was working or not, he was there to take the wheel and park for me. Guess you could say he was my personal Cake valet. And we became fast friends and soon found ourselves roommates. Seriously, nothing more. I had the downstairs, he had the main floor, and the kitchen was common ground. Lots of long, meaningful, funny talks around that kitchen table. Neither one of us could cook, but takeout was a biggie, and he was a great roommate. One time I got called out to cover tornadoes, and Michael got called out at the same time. I said, "Michael, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do with my dog?" Michael shouted downstairs, "Put your mattress against the sliding glass door and leave him down there. He'll be fine." Michael didn't realize I had a waterbed. And then we had some cultural differences. The language barrier. Kansas meets Denver. Genius meets short girl who wants to be a photographer so she can see things from the front row. We were different. That's what made us laugh. For example, Michael usually drove 50, 60 miles to get to Pratt. Mile. Not miles, mile. 50 mile an hour to drive 50 mile. As much as I tried to get him to put an S on it, he just wouldn't. And Michael also taught me some very important language. I learned that green means it's John Deere, and red means it's International Harvest. He taught me a lot about farming. He told me about his dog named Duke. All of them. One of the dogs died on the farm. My dad got a new dog. Really? What'd he name it? Duke? Really? Michael said that's the way it was. In June of 1984, Michael was spending his vacation harvesting wheat. I went to the farm to shoot a photo essay. I got to ride on the combine with him. I got to ride in the combine with him. I was filthy dirty with a t-shirt on that said I'd rather be in Denver, which was not true. I was dry, I was hot, and I thought it was great. At one point, I asked Michael to stop the combine so I could get way ahead of him and get that nice, long, pretty telephoto shot. Michael said no. What? Michael never said no to a good shot, or to me. No? Why not? Michael said, "You see those clouds over there? They've got lightning in them." He said, "This wheat is my dad's living. Harvest. It all comes down to now. Stopping could cost a lot." My photo essay was then titled "Race in the Rain." Michael taught me about farming. He loved the farm, loved the harvest, and taught me to appreciate how hard you've worked your whole life for your family. One time he was headed back to Wichita from a weekend at home, called frantic, "Boil water, boil water." "What?" "Boil water." "Michael, you're having a baby?" No, he said. "Have you never had fresh picked sweet corn?" An hour later, I had my first ear of that delicacy, and the next 4 days it was breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Once again, thanks to Michael, my life was changed forever. Of course, David told you about you jerks. I can't believe you're here. But that wasn't Michael's only trip to Colorado. Before moving to New York, Michael and David came with the cake show Kaleidoscope. 2 boys from Kansas in matching snow boots that had stitching like cowboy boots on the side. Best friends, dear friends. Michael knew how to be a great friend. And if you knew him at all, you knew Michael wasn't much into sports. Watching or participating, just not really his thing. The years have faded, but during another visit, can't remember when, I convinced Michael to slap a couple of boards on his feet and hit the ski slopes. Ooh, everybody went, ooh, you know. I didn't know what I was getting myself into, but Michael showed up to spring ski with his white long johns and brand new blue jeans. Spring skiing. The snow gets a little bit damp by the end of the day. It's not as cold. It's more fun, a little more wet. He only tried the sport once, and let me tell you, he skied a blue streak. Literally. Remember those blue jeans? Michael fell so many times that when he slid down the mountain, he left a blue trail. And we laughed. He loved it. I knew the long johns started out white because when we got home, he asked me to wash them, and they looked more like they'd been dyed to match the Levi's. I did ask if he was blue from the waist down, but like I said, we were only friends, nothing romantic, so no details beyond the long johns were ever shared, but I'm convinced his legs looked like they belonged to a Smurf. I could go on and on. We had many great times in Wichita, Colorado, and New York. Thanksgiving with him and David, ABC tours, theater, great food, tons of laughter. And ironically, I spent this past June and July working and commuting to and from Denver to New York. I asked Michael to come to the city for dinner many times, but he never did. As I look back, I'm pretty sure he wasn't strong enough to make the commute. New York was no longer good for him, so he was headed west. He'd hoped to make it back to Pratt, but for now, he was going to live with his dear sister Linda, just north of me in Longmont. I knew I'd see him in Colorado, so I didn't push him to come visit me in the Big Apple. July 26th, Michael made it to the airport and passed out at the ticket counter. Say what you want to about the airlines, but they were great. They got him to the hospital, got his luggage to Denver, held on to it until we picked it up. At one point, I called to postpone his plane ticket and let them know he still wasn't healthy enough to fly. United Airlines wished my husband well. When I called and told Michael that, he got quite a chuckle. As fate would have it, I was leaving New York 2 days after Michael became ill, so I headed to New Jersey. At one point during our visit, a doctor came in to discuss surgical procedures with Michael. There was a possibility that he would have 2 surgery teams working on him. I said I'd never heard of that, and confirmed 2 teams can do surgery on 1 person at the same time. The doctor said absolutely. Michael, quiet Michael, who didn't say much but had impeccable timing when he talked, said, "Maybe I should get fixed." I repeated it. "Michael, did you just say you should get fixed?" He said, "Yeah, why not?" Lots of laughs and a visit I will cherish always. Putting it simply, Michael was a very complicated and private man. As we learn more about these past months, I almost made it. It is apparent that Mike was sick for a long time. If we only knew, would we have been able to change anything? We can't ask that, and we can't blame ourselves. Michael was a grown man making grown-up decisions. He lived his life as he wanted to. Read over his Facebook posts over and over again. Over and over again. He was a mentor, a giver, and a friend, maybe even at his own expense. But that is something we will never know. Compassionate and kind, Michael was about everyone around him, never about himself. So number 18, a lucky number for me. I was blessed to have Michael in my life. A Dr. Pepper toast to you, my friend Michael Craig Huitt, from number 39 to number 41, l'chaim, and cheers to your life.
Well, I don't know about you, but I didn't want to be here today for a lot of reasons. I'll tell you where I would rather be. I would rather be in New York with Mike Huitt. I would rather be in Washington, D.C. with Mike Huitt. I'd rather be in Las Vegas with Mike Huitt, or I'd rather be in Wichita with Mike Huitt. Talking about him in the past just doesn't seem right. It was early August of 1978, and I got this call from this kid at Skyline High School in Pratt, and he wanted to know if he could come over and shadow me for a while. I said, sure, we like to have that done. We like to encourage people to get involved in journalism. So the day came, and he showed up. And there was one thing about Mike, and others have alluded to it, that I just loved. He had the greatest, warmest smile. When he smiled, it was like the sun coming out from behind a cloud. You just felt warm inside, and you felt like you had known him all your life. He was just one of those young people with this great smile. I toured him through the station, showed him around, and then about noontime at Launch Complex 533-7 near Rock, Kansas, where a Titan II missile was about to blow up, that's where we went, Mike in tow, as Gary talked about. Mike Huitt did not get home to Pratt, Kansas for 3 days because we were there covering the story, and we didn't get back to the station for 3 days because we were feeding the networks. And Mike was incredible. Anything we wanted, he got for us. It was almost like he was a member of the team and had been there forever. He had just felt right. And after those 3 days ended, Mike had the bug. He wanted to be in television news, no question about it. So, later on, after his little stint at KU, we hired him as a photojournalist at Cake TV. He was great. He had such talent, and he was brilliant. Now, I don't say that about everybody, but he was really brilliant. He could tell a story with video and have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it was great, and you could put it on television almost without editing. He was wonderful, but he was like a sponge. And every day he would come to work, and he had to be learning. He had to be challenged by technology every day. So he learned everything there was to learn in the newsroom, including all the technology, the editing, the cameras. Then he went to other departments of the station. He learned to be a director. He could run the master control area. He could run the big tape machines, the big 2-inch tape machines or the 1-inch tape machines. He could do all that, but he had to be challenged every day of his life because he had to keep learning. That was just the way Mike was. And Mike would sit down and he would talk to me about some of his technology that he was working on, and I always nodded my head like I understood, but I never did. He was brilliant. He was a step above. He was leading the road for the rest of us. Well, finally, there came a day at Cake in which he had learned everything. All the technology we had, he had in his head. And Mike was the kind of guy that when he got a little bored, he wasn't always fun to be around. So I sat down with Mike and I said, Mike, look, I think you need to move on. And here's the reason why. You've learned everything here. Everything that we've taught you, everything that you've learned on your own, there's no way we can challenge you again. You need to move to a larger market that has more technology, that has more buttons to push and more flashy screens and all of that stuff. I said, don't leave tomorrow, but find the right job and then leave. Well, in a couple of months, he did find the right job. It was with ABC in New York. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with the job Mike had, I want to tell you how important this was and how a kid from Pratt, Kansas could have this incredible job. The job was in the satellite division of ABC New York. Mike started as just a single person booking satellite shots for Cake TV or stations in Denver or New Mexico, wherever. And he did that, and he conquered that. After a period of time, Mike became the head of ABSAT. That's the satellite division of ABC News. He was over all the news satellite programming. He was over all the entertainment division's satellite programming. He controlled all of that. It was a huge thing, and I was so proud of him. My buttons would just about come off anytime anybody said his name, because he had accomplished something that very few people in the world get to accomplish. They get to work at ABC, be the head of the department, and control all of that technology. That was really something. Well, he was there for about 24 years, and he and I would visit, and I'd fly to New York, and we'd go somewhere and talk and have a nice drink, and we had a good time, and I'd visited him there several times, many times. And one day, ABC decided to lay off 600 people in one day. Mike was one of those 600 people. Mike had the dream job, and it was the job he always wanted. And he was challenged every day at that place, every day. And I remember at one time at the National Press Photographers Television News Video Workshop that's held at the University of Oklahoma, he put on a program in which he tried to explain the technology of satellites to us. He understood it. The rest of us nodded our head again like we understood, but really we didn't. And all of a sudden, on the screen in the room where he's teaching, Peter Jennings appears. Mike had arranged for Peter Jennings, the legendary anchor at ABC News, to speak to our group via satellite there. It was marvelous. It was a surprise. It was just a great treat. And Mike had arranged all that. It was wonderful, and Mike thoroughly enjoyed it. And he taught that class for many years at the University of Oklahoma. We all enjoyed it. It was after he was laid off at ABC that I also was in New York, and I met with him. He had changed. He had changed just a little bit. He never forgot his friends, and that was the great thing. Never, ever forgot his friends. And I called him up, and I said, hey, let's go out for a drink, and it was great. We went out. But you know what? There was a little sadness behind his face, a little sadness in those eyes. And while he was upbeat, still there was a little bit of sadness. So I got a call not long after that from the folks at PBS in New York, in Washington, D.C., actually. And they said, we have a job application here for Mr. Mike Huitt, and here's what we want him to do. We want him to take all of our old technology, design new technology so that everything works together here at PBS. Is he the man for the job? And I said, well, yes, he is. He's absolutely the man for the job. And they said, well, what are his negatives? And I said, his negative is he'll work too hard. That's his negative. So they hired him, and he worked there, and he did his absolute best for a couple, 3 years. And then the funding went away for his project, and so did Mike. Again, talking to him, he was always upbeat, but a little sad. Over the next years, he worked for several satellite companies, always trying to explain what he did to me, and I never understood. We would meet in Las Vegas. We would have a good time. We would go out to dinner, have a wonderful time. He was on the road a lot, but there was that little piece of sadness there that I could detect. Now, people wonder about Sharon and his relationship. It was just brother-sister. It was brother-sister, and I think I've figured out the reason for it. It was brother-sister because guys don't talk to each other about deep stuff. We just don't. But a guy will talk to a woman about deep stuff. And he talked to her. And that was great. He had a confidant. And that worked well for all the years that we knew Mike. Now, as time went on, Sharon would call me and say, you know, if you can go up and visit Mike, maybe you should. You know, just say hi. I said, okay. But as Gary Shapiro said, time marches on, and we don't always get to do the things that we want to do. So 8 or 9 weeks ago, I get a call from Sharon that he had collapsed at the ticket counter. And all of that was taking place at the hospital where they moved him to. And about that same time, I'm having an issue of my own. I was diagnosed with, the doctor told me I was going to have a heart attack. And so I said, okay, what do we do? And he said, well, you have to have open heart surgery. I said, okay, let's do it. Let's get it done. He said, okay. The night before I was scheduled to have it was the night before Mike was scheduled to have his. What are the chances? What are the chances? Anyway, I called Mike. He was at the hospital. He couldn't talk. But someone put the phone up to his ear. And I said, okay, Mike, listen to me. Here's the deal. You and I are going to have this same surgery. I said, I find that incredible. So here's what you have to do. You have to be strong. I'll be strong. And then after this is all over, we'll meet and have a party. And I know he heard me because things were uttered in the background, not words, but just things. So I know he heard me. So I went into surgery, and Mike never did because he was too weak. And I didn't know that until I got out of surgery. So he was a good guy, really a special guy, brilliant at every level of the operation. And he's a guy who I learned from, he's a guy who I trusted, and he's a guy who I wanted to be around. He was a good friend. He was a great brother, son, confidant. And Mike Huitt is one of those people who enters your life like once in a lifetime. And I'm so glad he entered mine.
Okay, this one's for Gabby. Oh birds fly, and the dreams that you dream of, dreams really do come true. Ooh, someday you wish upon a star, wake up where the clouds are far behind. Be where trouble melts like lemon drops, high above the chimney top. That's where you find me, oh, somewhere over the rainbow. Bluebirds fly, and the dream that you dare to, oh why can't well, I see trees of green and red roses too. I watch them bloom for me and you, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. Well, I see skies of blue, and I see clouds of white, and the brightness of day. I like the dark, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. The colors of the rainbow, so pretty in the sky, are also on the faces of people passing by. I see friends shaking hands, singing, how do you do? They really say, I love you. I hear babies cry, and I watch them grow. They'll learn much more than we'll know, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. Someday I wish upon a star, wake up where the clouds are far behind. Be where trouble melts like a lemon drops, high above the chimney top. That's where you find me, oh, somewhere over the rainbow, way up high. And the dream that you dare to, why, oh why can't I?